Well, everyone knows they need to play the wind for whitetails. That's the way it's always been for decades. And I think we've migrated into times where people think they can fool a whitetail's nose, especially an old mature buck, by using some scent contraption, gel, spray, whatever it might be. And I believe there's some truth to that. When you're walking into your stands, the amount of scent you leave on your trails and that spider web of scent that you can diminish over your entire property, there is some truth to that. But bottom line is, if you're on stand and your scent is blowing towards that monster of a lifetime, 95% of the time, no matter what you're doing, you're going to get busted. And so I like to take that completely out of the equation. But you have to understand how wind works in order to do that. And one of the problems with the wind is the wind rarely seems to be exactly what it's forecasted. And there's a lot of reasons why. So we're going to go through those lists of 5 ways, maybe even a 6th or 7th way, depending on how the conversation goes, to how you can manage your wind and things that you need to look for in the wind and in the forecast to make sure that when you go out to XYZ stand and it's saying there's a southwest wind, that you understand what that wind is going to do in the morning, in the evening, if you're near drop off, if it's light compared to heavy. And we're going to talk about managing those winds, talk about wind blockers, downwind blockers, and we'll talk about the first one, thermals. Now you could write an entire book on hunting thermals and hills and winds for whitetails, but you know, real simple. And we'll get into some more advanced stuff, but I want to just breeze through this really quick. But evening thermals, when the temperature is going down, then the winds and the thermals are going to be dropping. When the temperature is going up in the morning, then the thermals are going to be rising. So always remember that, up in the morning, down in the evening. And the greater the temperature change, the more you can count on that to happen. Also, believe it or not, especially in the evening, the lighter the winds, the more you can account for that to happen predictably, falling with those afternoon thermals. Thermals are really cool, really interesting. What I like about them is in hills you can actually cheat the winds because they will not do exactly what the forecast tells you. And I'll tell you, for example, we'll just go through a couple thermal examples here really quick. But if you're in hill country and you're looking down at a deer trail, ridge lines extending left to right, you're looking down the hill. If the wind is coming over your back, it's going to flip around that ridge and come back and hit you in the face. You can get away with that. I've shot a lot of mature bucks doing that and counting on that with the wind at my back in the morning, looking down at that buck down below me from a tree stand, and that wind will just circle around, hit me in the face, and it's a non-factor. At the same time, of course, if that wind is in my face, it's a non-factor. So a lot of times you can get away with 180 to 200 degrees of wind in the morning in hill country by blowing your wind straight away from the ridge or straight towards the ridge, as long as you're looking down at the deer. So I kill a lot of deer in the morning hours, up high, looking down at the trail. And that works out really well when you have exceptional bedding areas up high and food sources down low, so that you can count on those bucks being up in those high ridge areas and those does being down lower towards that food source. So a great setup for that, and that's how I kill a lot of my bucks. That's how we're setting up for a lot of our stands in Minnesota on the new farm, is looking at that situation. Evening, you can get burned in the evening because you'll be down at the bottom of the ridge, maybe next to a food source, even if you're between bedding areas, whatever it is. But when you're looking uphill and those winds are coming from on top of the hill and down towards you, the heavier the wind, the further that wind is still going to circle right back uphill, curl right back uphill. So you could be facing the ridge, winds coming from the top and over. You're going to feel it on the back of your neck blowing up the ridge. And the stronger the wind, the further it'll blow up. So what I like in the evening hours, if I'm hunting in hill country, I like making sure the wind's coming from the side. I have no other ridges that wind's going to hit within 400 to 500 yards, so that I can count on clean wind that's blowing across the hollow next to me, across the side of the ridge, so I can count on that wind that's coming from the right to actually blow my scent to the left. And what's cool is the last half hour, 45 minutes, let's say you're watching a deer trail right in front of you that goes left to right. Again, you're looking uphill. The closer it gets to dark and the more those temperatures are falling, that wind's going to tail off down below and to your left, or if it's coming from the left, it'll tail off below and down to the right. And that makes it so if you're watching that deer trail travel right in front of you, left to right, it makes it a lot easier for you to predict that, okay, I need to set up this evening wind so that maybe it's blowing along or parallel to that deer trail 20 yards away. It's kind of iffy, but you can count on the closer it gets to dark and the more the temperatures are falling, usually that last 45 minutes, the more those winds and thermals are going to take your scent down below and into the valley. One problem with all of this, when the wind is higher, the less likely that wind is going to drop. And that brings up the next point, and this is drop-offs. So when we have drop-offs, and this is an example right behind me, you can see the ridge just dropping right off. What's interesting in that is when that wind is dropping off, I'm having my scent blow this way. Let's say that wind is really light, and we'll talk about light winds in a second. I don't like them, but let's say that wind is really light to non-existent at all. If I'm backed up against a steep drop-off on a ridge, then I can count on, with less wind, even if that wind's on my face, let's say it drops down to where it's 0 miles an hour for that last hour, then I can count on those winds dropping down that ridge system the lighter the winds are. So if it's really strong and it's blowing this way at an angle, and there's a chance that deer could be coming from that angle over there, then you can count on that night. It doesn't matter if with those thermals pulling, that wind's going to keep pulling to the left, the direction of the wind when you're up on top of that ridge, and it's just going to keep blowing down the hill to that left side strong because those winds are strong. But just remember, if the winds are really light, then they'll eventually just pull straight down behind you. It's even more pronounced if you have a draw behind you, just a big ditch that's cutting down into the side of the ridge. You can expect those winds at any angle to eventually settle into that draw and then travel straight down to the bottom. So that's something you can count on the evening. Evening winds are tough. They can really hurt you. Sitting right on the edge of a drop-off, light winds, you can count on them being pulled. We had a sit the other day, Dante and I went out, and it was light winds. They said 0 to 2 miles an hour coming from the north. We were facing north. But with that long, steep ridge, it went down 350 feet in elevation behind me. We were able to have those winds right on that drop-off pull down the entire evening. And they'll pull down a lot earlier in the evening when those winds are not present and they're not strong. And that brings up light winds, strong winds. We notice a lot, especially you think, boy, it's really settling down, it's quiet, it's this last half hour light and there's no wind. It's not necessarily a good thing. What I find, especially with mature bucks, that with a little bit of wind, just a moderate amount, and I'm talking 4, 5 to 8 miles an hour, then I find those to be the perfect conditions, especially in that deer 30 time where you expect those deer to be moving. And that's a great time for you to have an appreciable amount of wind. It seems like deer in general, especially the older they become, they want that wind in their face. They want that wind a constant direction so they can tell which way they're traveling and which way they can move into, which way they can downwind, scent check, bedding areas. But what I find is that moderate winds are a lot better than light winds. So when you see that in the forecast and you see a good forecast night on HuntCast, and it lets you know that you should be out there, this is the time to hunt. When you see those moderate winds at the same time, that's a really good thing because there's a level of consistency there. With that consistency, point number 4 or 5, whatever it is now, you really need to look forward 4 to 5 hours in the forecast and always pay attention to what winds are coming next. For example, 8 o'clock at night, tonight it's supposed to be west-southwest to southwest winds. And at some point during the middle of the night, and we're looking at about 4 a.m., it's switching to east-northeast. If those winds, let's say it's getting dark at 8 o'clock, and you see east-northeast popping into the forecast about 11 or 12 o'clock, just within 3 to 4 hours, you need to plan for those winds too. The wind does not just go from southwest to east-northeast and all of a sudden switch. What it does do is it's a tug of war going back and forth. Eventually the winds that it's changing over to wind, and it forms a level of consistency. But somewhere in there, whether it's 2 hours, 4 hours, or 5 hours, it's not just a half hour, and it's not 8 hours away, but somewhere in that range of a few hours, you need to pay attention to the winds that are coming next. It doesn't matter if it's a morning sit or an evening sit, those winds are always going to creep into the forecast. There'll be that tug of war and balance between those winds. You know, again, this is so important. We talk about the wind and stand and planning for stands and hiding your scent. It goes back to, and I say this all the time, I'll just stick this in there, but the best form of scent control and wind control on your stand is stand location. Always locate your stand where you have downwind blockers, and that's the next point. Downwind blockers are so critical. I like getting next to a steep drop off where I don't expect any deer, blowing my scent into open hardwoods, blowing my scent into a lake, a pond, an open river system where a deer are not traveling through, a subdivision, a golf course. That's why some of those suburban deer are so easy to kill, because they're in areas where they're used to people, they're used to human scent, and you can just back up and access into a non-deer area that's a golf course, a subdivision, a pond, whatever it might be, blow your scent into it, access along there so they can't see you, they can't hear you, they're used to those noises anyways. Those downwind blockers for stand locations, that's how I set every one of my stand locations. So I make sure that I just don't think probability-wise, percentage-wise. Again, we play a lot of poker in the deer woods. I don't play at deer camp too much, but poker in the deer woods, you're always looking at every percentage. I'm looking at like this wedge where I can blow this 90-degree wedge, this 100-degree wedge, where I can blow my scent into. I feel I have a 5% chance of deer actually getting into that area for many different reasons. Like I said, subdivisions, golf course, roads, lakes, streams, steep cliffs, drop-offs, open hardwoods, lots of downwind blockers. And that should be your first. Maybe I should have started with that point, but that should be how you set your stand locations up. Never rely on that you can just cheat the wind and that you're going to be good for that sit because you use some type of contraption or spray or something else. I firmly believe in the limit shield, in the products that we use to hide our scent in and out of the stand. And I'm here to tell you, a 6-year-old Midwest, big buck, southern state, southwest, southeast, central Midwest, southern Midwest, Kansas, Oklahoma, wherever it is, when those bucks get to that age, they are spooky creatures, and if you're going after one and they smell your scent, you're going to be sunk the majority of the time. Hey, sorry to interrupt this video, but my web class series is finally begun. How to design your whitetail property is on my website, and there's a link in the description. Please check it out. The bottom line, though, to wrap this wind segment up is that you have to play the wind. You have to make sure that your stand's set up appropriately. That's the best way to beat the wind. But just because it says southwest in the forecast does not mean it's going to be southwest. It doesn't matter if you're on a drop-off, morning thermals, evening thermals. Even we didn't talk about, but you have an inside corner where you're hunting with a lot of conifer and pine and thick branches and brush. You can have that wind swirling around in that corner. If the wind's going to be forecasted as something else in several hours, there's many ways that the wind is going to change. And I'll leave you with one last windism to hunt by and live by. We've killed a whole lot of mature bucks on the lee side, which is the calm side of the ridge systems. We do find that deer in general, especially bucks, do move a lot when it's semi-windy to windy. But what we find is they're moving to seek shelter, the lee side of a swamp, the lee side of a ridge system. They're getting into the calm areas. It doesn't mean that they're traveling around 50-mile-an-hour winds and you're past your favorite oak stand high up on the ridge. It means they're seeking shelter. They're on the calm side. Bottom line is if you hunt those calm sides, a lot of times we're hunting them in the morning. We're hunting above the movement. We're using those morning thermals. There's a lot of ways to use the wind to your advantage. I hope these make sense. I know they're a little random back and forth, but you have to play the wind in order to cheat the wind, and there's a lot of ways to do so. If you spend a lot more time focusing on the wind, which way it's going, then you're going to be a successful hunter, highly successful hunter, as you go throughout the seasons, this season and beyond.